Thank you for the introduction. So just a quick word on the NFB. Does everybody here know the NFB? Yes? So we've been around for 77 years. We have been exploring visual storytelling, all form, movie, documentary, short film, interactive doc. And we also have a history of innovation. We always have been exploring with the technique. We were the first to do stereoscopic film, animation film in 1951 and 1952. I actually worked on the restoration of these films in 2014. We pioneered 3D animation with Softimage and Sandy. I will talk a bit more about Sandy later. IMAX was invented at the NFB. And now, well, we're exploring storytelling with virtual reality and mixed reality. And the question is why? Why do that? And I thought that was an interesting thing to talk about today with the group here. When I started bringing VR as a topic at the NFB about 5 years ago and trying to explore that and buying equipment for that, one of the questions I heard a lot was why? Why would we do that? There's no market for it. There's no, we don't know exactly how to tell a story with that. The hardware was terrible. There was no software really to render or to do 360 video or interactive VR, even less. So why? Why would you do that? My answer to that was because it's going to be something important. One of the reasons it's going to be something important is because it's not replacing movie, it's not replacing TV, it's not replacing what we know already. It's a computing platform. We can have movie in VR, we can see movie in VR, we can do sculpting in VR, we can do creation in VR of all kind. It's a computing platform, and we need to study that platform to understand it, to explore it, to create tools for it, because it's going to be something important. So we had our first DK1, I think, as soon as there was a Kickstarter for it, and we started playing, and it was obvious already that game would be a thing in VR. It was easy. The game engine existed. It was the 3D world was, given. The stereoscopy was free with the game engine. That was obvious, but how do you tell story with that? How do you explore things with that? And to me personally, what was more important is how do I take these tools and give access to creators that we still do traditional animation. We still have people working on glass. We explore still all the old technique, but with new equipment, with new ways of creating in the digital world. But how do we get people involved and creators involved in that? So that answers, I think, a bit the why. I'll keep going and coming back to that a bit later. So some of the VR projects that we have right now at the NFB, specifically at the Animation Studio. The NFB has many studios. We do documentaries. We have studios all over Canada, in Toronto, Vancouver, Edmonton, Halifax. And we have we're all covering a different market. We all explore things in a different way. Being part of the Animation Studio was giving me an early access to VR because we do things in the computer, and because we have access to a studio where we actually have creators on site, and because we also use cameras and everything. So we have access to all the different ways of building things. So at the Animation Studio right now, these are some of the projects that we are working on at different stages. Some are actually finished, some are really early in the process. We have Minotaur VR that will be online soon, but has been touring festival. We have BioCube, Lonely Neuron, Museum of Symmetry. I'll talk about a few of those.
Can I ask what's a 2.5D?
Absolutely. Good question. Really good question. I will talk about, this is Museum of Symmetry, and I will talk about that project later more in detail. But that's a great question. The other project that we have, whoops, that's my little pointer. I was going to use that like Minority Report way of navigating my slide, but the TV is right there, so I don't need to. So these are other projects that we have on other studios. You might have heard of Bear 71. There's a VR component to it now. We have Ocean School that has a prototype. We're working with the National Theatre in London for VR theater project. We have the Unknown Photographers. If you have been in festival like Tribeca or others, you might have seen those. Way to go. What's interesting in that table, I think, is when I was building it, I was trying to define a few things. The type. VR is vast. What is it that we do? What is the type of project? Is it VR? Is it AR? Is it MR? Is it a mix of all that? What is it? And sometimes it's a difficult question when we start a project, when we talk to producer and creators. Why do you want to do a VR project? Why do you think that VR project, that project that you have or that idea works better in VR and not in MR? We have a project called, at the animation studio called Lonely Neuron. It used to be called The Brain. It's a very simple project. We just want to explain how the brain works. Very simple, no, very, very difficult, very vast. And we want that project to be based on the most, actual science. And we want to explain not how every brain works, we want to explain how your brain, personally, your brain works. It started as an IMAX project a long time ago. Wasn't the right fit to explain what it is. When VR came, really early we thought, okay, this is it, this is great. We can bring people in a completely different environment. Maybe we can bring them in their own brain. And then we realized, working on it, making prototype, the limitation, first, who has access to VR? So we had to go mobile VR. We had to make world that would be pretty light, that would work on those very limited GPUs and CPUs. How do you make this work? And is it a game? Is it an exploration? So we realized that no, VR wasn't ready for it, and now we're exploring more an MR project with HoloLens, and we think that might be a good fit, but it's exploration right now. But every step we learn about the technique, about the limitation, about how you reach people, how you talk to people, and how you tell story. If you want to stop me at any time to ask questions, please feel free to do so. One of the first things I do when I sit with creators and I'm trying to explain what VR is, and often with producers or people that didn't have that much experience with VR, is generally, okay, what are the different types of VR? And just to simplify things, I put it in two categories. There's the linear VR and there's the non-linear interactive VR. Linear VR simply can be what you're going to film with a camera. Usually it's going to be, I say usually, there's hybrids, I'll get to that, but usually it's going to be a linear project. You film, you edit, you make it work. Often the documentary VR right now, stereoscopic or not, fit in that category. It's linear, the action, the story is not changing because of decision that you make or because of the way you look at the world around you. And there's the non-linear aspect of it. You can think game, but you can think non-linear documentary also, usually in game engine. You're going to see that I put hybrid quite a bit because I do believe that we can mix things a lot, and it's one of the fun things with technology in general. Why not take 360 video in the game engine and start playing with the audio and specializing thing and put some interactivity and turn your game engine as a story engine? So why not mix things? But it helps when you start a project to understand what is linear, what is non-linear, and figuring out where you go with that. The other important thing is how much interactivity do you want your user or your viewer to experience in that project. Do you need interactivity at all? often it's easier to tell a story with no interactivity. When you add interactivity, telling a story is difficult, but can be really, really interesting and really compelling because the person then is even more involved in the story. So this is a completely arbitrary scale, but it gives an idea. Minotaur is a pre-rendered video, stereoscopic video. So basically you just look around, there's nothing, no decision being made, you just go with the flow, it's great. Way2Go, you might have seen it. It's a web-based VR experience. Some interactivity, you can get the character to run, stop, fly. You can explore a little bit around. And we have the Enemy Project, where there's a lot more interactivity with virtual character and other people in the same simulation as you. The limit are always, well, there's two questions. Why do you need interactivity? And then there's, okay, well, can you do that with the actual technology? The more interactive you go, the more you want people to be able to touch objects, manipulate things around, the more complex it gets, the more the hardware, software has to be able to support that. And all these questions, type of VR, range of interactivity, will have a huge impact on your production pipeline. So some of it was very familiar for us at the animation studio. The pipeline for real-time 3D project, if you remove the fact that we're in a game engine, so we need programmers, the rest is pretty similar to what we would do for a standard CG animation project. And same thing for documentary or for video 360. If you look at the VFX pipeline, it's pretty similar. Except that you're going to have some more scripting, more debugging, and the deliverables and the final channel to reach audiences are different. Just a note here, when I talk about capturing footage and that thing, I'm also including photogrammetry and videogrammetry right now, which is a very interesting avenue to explore. Videogrammetry is really basic right now, but I think it's going to be evolving to become something very interesting. Again, why not do hybrid and play with the pipeline? And this is just a basic step. Sorry, I should disable that. Why not mix things up? I think it's a good way to play. I'm just going to skip those slides really quickly, but the pipeline right now for video is pretty heavy, especially if you want to do stereoscopic video, which is a lot more compelling, a lot more immersive than standard 360 flat environment, 2D environment. The limitation are extreme, huge amount of data. The minute you have bad stitching, bad compression, things are lagging, I feel you get out of the experience really quickly. So we do video because we're trying to represent the real, but we're not good at that. That's how I feel. And especially coming from the animation department, I feel that you can create incredibly compelling world that feel real, that are really immersive, if you go in a more, I wouldn't say abstract, but more stylized direction. So animation is great for that. You can do documentary, you can do extremely compelling world if you do something a little bit more stylized that you control, and I think recreating the real right now is very difficult. Doesn't mean not trying to do it. Also, I think especially regarding documentary, I think a good doc is having access to a good subject. And if you think that story will be better in VR or in 360 video, well, go for it, even if you don't have the best camera. You might find ways to treat the image, you might find ways to deal with it, and it will be a great thing. So I'm not saying that it's impossible and not a good thing. I'm just saying it's pretty heavy and difficult right now. Game engines are fantastic because the stereo, the immersion is incredibly lifelike, powerful, except that you need, good programmers. And the more advanced your simulation project is, the more you need a solid team behind you to make it work. So for small projects, solo project, or small team, Unity is great to learn, not as powerful as Unreal, but and you can get away with a lot by yourself, but you still need to be a small team to make it happen. Audio. I'm going to talk quite a bit about audio a little bit later regarding one of our projects that we did, Minotaur VR. Audio in traditional cinema is hugely important. A lot of people say maybe 50% of your film is the audio. Obviously, art director and then DOP might argue that, but it is extremely important. You can make object disappear if you don't assign an audio to it. You can change the mood completely of a scene just by playing with the music and the audio. In VR, it's actually probably even more important. You can probably save bad visuals with great audio, and I don't think you can do the reverse. At the beginning of VR, we were stuck with the baked-in audio. So baked-in is we record stereo sound. That's for linear film, and audio was not interactive. You didn't have the head tracking. Quickly, we got head tracking with Game Engine. It was coming for free also, and it's getting better and better with Wwise and other tools like that. And the goal is definitely to go toward the interactive audio, especially for nonlinear interactive project, where the audio is generated also by the action that the user takes. So when you walk in VR, you want to hear your step. When you walk on a specific kind of ground, you want to hear the specific noise that it would do walking on snow. And the new generation of GPU and new technology, mixing ambisonic sound and ray tracing for audio, makes that more and more possible. We have a project called BioCube. I'm going to show a small early clip of the prototype where it's game engine based. The user is creating his own world, and the audio is extremely important in that. When the user creates his own ecosystem, it creates the audio at the same time, but also the soundtrack. And that soundtrack is unique for every user, for every world that they're creating. And their interaction with that world has an impact on audio and soundtrack. And the world itself it's really like an ecosystem, and it has an impact on the audio. Creating for VR in VR. That's something that since the beginning I really find extremely important. My goal was really early to give tools to creators that are not coders, that don't want to learn to code. The possibility to draw in space, to animate in space, to storyboard in VR space. I think it's 15 or 20 years ago, with IMAX Corporation, the NFB developed a tool called Sandy. Sandy is a software to do animation in 3D space. So you can imagine somebody being usually standing up in front of a 4-meter screen or larger with a stereoscopic projection with the IMAX glasses and a magnetic one, and they would draw in 3D space, and it's a fully and it's a complete animation software. So you can do keyframing, you have deformers, so that's a tool that we were already using, and we have been using quite a bit. So when Tiltbrush came out, it wasn't a surprise for us. It's something that we were using for a long time. But Sandy was meant to create film, stereoscopic film, but for the screen. It wasn't meant to render 360 video. All right. Except that we actually decided to go back in the code, even though Sandy is not GPU based, so it's not something we could use in real time like Tilbrush or Quill. We decided to go back in Sandy, take a project that we did already for the screen and modify the software and see if we could render at first for a dome, so first immersive space, dome projection. And then we did a 360 stereoscopic VR project with it. And the great news is that the VR project is actually way better, a lot more interesting than the film. The film was okay. It was, yeah, stereoscopic, that's great. It was already at the time where stereo 3D was, not so new anymore. The VR version is actually very interesting. And I'll show a little clip of that too. For me, it's very important to find tools that we can take artists, creators, sculptors, take them in VR, let them create things. And yes, maybe we need a team at first to support them, especially if it's connected to Unity or Game Engine. But try to free that creativity as much as possible, because that's what we do traditionally with our animation project. And it's starting to be there. Tilbrush, Quill, we're testing in MVR. We're working with Dolby, Fraunhofer, and Wyze to explore the audio part of it too. So how do you mix for VR? So it's definitely something we're pushing a lot. So Minotaur VR was that experiment that we did, taking an abstract linear stereoscopic film and we tried to bring that and make it a VR project. And it was successful. It toured festival quite a bit, and it's going to be online pretty soon. That's just a quick, not so great trailer that our marketing department did, but so as a film, it really felt like one of those, a little bit 1980 computer-generated graphic, and in the dome version too. But when you're in VR in it, the immersion, the feeling of immersion is very spectacular. And one of the things that I really like with it is that I'm just going to bring it into them. One of the things that I thought was very interesting is that you're not asking yourself, who am I in that world? A lot of times we talk about VR project, especially documentary, and we're wondering, okay, well, why am I here? Who am I? Why, why do I go through this? And this project, not once, and I interview people after a festival and I ask, and not once people ask, okay, what was I? Who was I? Why do I travel through that world? It's just like a really great, fun experience. And I thought that was really interesting. So it started as a movie, standard 16:9, projection, stereoscopic movie. We did a full dome project with it, and then a stereoscopic VR. The tools changed a little bit while we were doing that. We started with Sandy. We managed to render 360 equirectangular frames, but then to be able to do some of the background, I had to go in Maya because Sandy was not able to do that. It worked for the traditional film and the dome version because we could hide things. The traditional film, we can hide things outside of the frame, so all the mistake, the seams, no problem. The dome version, same thing. We have 210 degree, 230 degree. We can hide a lot of stuff here. For the 360 version, well, all the mistakes were coming out and we had to fix that. So I needed Sandy, Maya, and Nuke with Kara VR to fix some of the issues with that. So, and this is a project that's all CG, so all pre-rendered, and we still have issues that we need to fix. If you go out with a camera and you're trying to film things, well, think about that. Think about where you're going to hide people. Think about how you're going to hide your lighting. Think about how you're going to hide your cables. try to figure out how you can get away with all those things you don't want to see in your movie or you don't want to have. The audio part was a big aspect of that experiment. We mixed the film for 7.1 for theater, which is what we do for all the our film project. But then for the VR version, we realized we bring the stereo version of the film, of the audio, and it's not working. We need to mix something that will be interactive and will work. Early, the technology showed that it was possible to have a 5.1 and a Samsung Gear with one player at the time, the Samsung VR player. We could specialize a 5.1. So we just took the 5.1 mix, listened to it in VR, and it was terrible because everything was mixed for the screen in front with a little bit of sound, you know, in the back, but it wasn't great for VR. It wasn't interactive at all. So we've reopened the mix, and we thought, wow, we can actually mix VR in a theater. It's a thing. It works. And well, after it was like, no, it doesn't work, because we mix it. We compress it, we bring it on the headset, we put it on the phone, we listen to it, and we realize, not quite. Those particles need to move. I don't feel like I'm inside it. There's things that need to be rearranged. We were mixing with Pro Tools still, not great. And the recording of the audio, the beginning of the project, when you record, you know, piano tracks, sound, when you do the sound design, you have to record things in a way that you can mix for VR after. If it's recorded for a stereo project or even for a 5.1, there's chances you might not have what you need to make it work. And we realized quickly that, you know, there's a producer, there's a creator, there's the mixer, there's a sound designer, there's 4 or 5 people in that theater listening to that mix. When you put the headset, there's one person that then have to take the headset out, talk about the experience to someone else and say, you know, that scene, there's that sound in the back, not interactive at all. So this process takes forever and is very difficult. So you have to be in VR. To mix in VR, you have to mix not for the theater, because you're always mixing for the theater when you're in the theater, no matter what the film is. You have to mix for the room that you see in VR. And ideally, we have to be everybody in the same simulation. And we're working on that. We're working with Dolby and Fraunhofer. We're using their beta software to see if we can. And now our Pro Tools, our sound mixing room has a headset, Oculus headset, and we can mix in VR and listen to it directly in VR. With a game engine, a lot easier. That's for linear film, pre-rendered film. With a game engine, you can use what's given with the engine in Unity, or you can use tools like Wwise, and you can interactively, in real time, mix for VR, which is a lot easier. But there's a lot of aspect to that, to complexity, but it's very, very interesting to mix in the game engine. Testing VR project. As I said, even for the visual, when you're looking at a VR project or testing it, you're alone in that simulation. And then you have to talk to a producer and a sound designer and the programmer and all the people animating, and it's very hard to review and talk about it in real time. So that's why I set up a room with a 3-meter vertical dome like that. That room has a huge dome, and it's a stereoscopic projection. And the relation in terms of what you see in your VR project and what people see in the dome is 1-for-1. So the sense of scale, the sense of space, it fills your field of view, and the relation with the object and the environment is very similar. So we can have 3 people in front of that dome seeing in real time what the person see in the game engine or in a pre-rendered video in stereo. And that helps just for the progress review and to talk about the project and see what people see in real time. Very useful. So I got pieces to create that dome from everywhere. I ordered the dome from an observatory in Israel. I have a first surface mirror that comes from New Zealand. I have software from Holland to unwarp the image and making it work on the dome. But it's working pretty well as it's a production tool. It's a good way to present a project also to a few people. But really the idea is just to make progress review and comments and make the project evolve faster until we can all be in the same simulation and see a different thing. Which is something we can do with HoloLens for mixed reality project, and it's so much fun where we can all see the same object or the same environment but from our own point of view. This is really, really great. So eventually VR will get there. So this is an early prototype of BioCube that I was talking a bit before. So we were experimenting with using the Leap as a tracking device for your hand, so you've probably seen video for that. I still think that hands are the best accessory, the best tracker controllers to play in VR. The Leap, sadly, are pretty has a lot of limitation. One of it is that you have to keep your hand like that all the time. In front of you, it's very unnatural. It works, but in a real world, you want to sculpt, you want to do things, you're not going to keep your hand like that in front of you. But it's a really good experiment. Right now, we're playing with the same project, but using controllers for the Vive and the Oculus because it's just more freeing. Already, controllers. You still have to do that with your hand, but already with the Oculus and Meta 2, there's a lot more freedom. So I think we're going to get there. There's something about being able to grab object, touch objects, sculpt, paint with your finger that to me is still beating any controllers. Museum of Symmetry. Oh, I think I should wait. I'll show you the early environment test that we're doing. It's a 2D artist, 2D cartoon animation artist, and she wants to do a VR project. We're so excited because she's got a very interesting style, very great ideas. But she doesn't want to deal with 3D modeling, with 3D modelers. She doesn't want to do rigging. She taught herself Unity and she's happy with what she knows and control. But she wants to go back to her 2D roots and use 2D drawings in her project. And we're really happy about that because we're creating that 2.5D hybrid that I was talking a bit earlier. So this is an early test of the environment where you're going to see a 3D environment with 2D elements in it. And I'll show you what we're starting to work out with the characters. So that's an equirectangular render. It's in Unity, so it's not moving like that normally. But it gives you an idea. You have really like 2D elements, 2D plane, 3D objects, 3D world. It's extremely interesting when you're in that world, what you get to see. And for the character, what we're testing, and it works really well. It's really just an early test, super rough. But now we're filming that in 4K in front of a good green screen. We're basically filming people in costumes in front of a green screen. So nothing new. But we're putting them in the VR world, and we get some funny things like that still look 3D, still look like it has a volume, and we didn't lit the character based on that world yet, but the idea is to have the world created, we know what the lighting is like, we lit the character accordingly, So all the highlights and the shadings fit with that world. And that's a really rough costume that Paloma did in an hour before we did that test. But now we have a lot more elaborate characters. We create the eyes in the game engine, so the eye tracking work. The character is actually looking at you when you move around, and that was very important. To have a 2D flat character that looked 3D is totally work. You completely buy it. But the character has to be able to look at you when you move around. So that we have to do it in the game engine. But it's a very quick, efficient, interesting way of creating characters for that world, and we're very happy with what we're starting to get. So the 2.5D element, that's the project. This little guy was actually just an actor, quickly filmed in front of a green screen, imported in a game engine. We didn't even spend time lighting the character properly to give it the volume that matched the environment. But it's actually very convincing, and you could create tons of character like that.
Do the 2D pieces, like the head, for example, is it always, do you kind of posterize it so that wherever you are, it's facing, the 2D image is facing?
Well, what we're playing with is that there's going to be many different movement that the character can do or will do. So we're recording the actor doing many different actions, and we can morph, we can merge from one action to the other depending of where the user is, and the relation between the user and the character. We cheat also by getting the character to turn toward you. And you can, it's surprising how much you can get away with, but at one point the illusion breaks. So we're cheating by getting the character to actually move a little, so we always keep that safe angle. And it really works really well. The other thing we're playing with is this level of detail, similar to when you have a mesh that is extremely high res when you're very close, and low res mesh when it's very far. We're doing it basically with filming in 4K, but providing only the resolution that you need when the character is very far, and only the high resolution character when you're close. So this way we can save on bandwidth and make things work more efficiently. I'll skip that really quickly because, well, that would be in a different presentation, but it's not new that we film in 360. This is a rig that was used in the 60s at the NFB to do 360 video and film, and there was a 360 projection too. It was cylindrical projection. Obviously, technology evolved, and we got 360 spherical projection, and then spherical stereoscopic film. Again, I still feel the quality is not there. This is probably the most up-to-date camera that are accessible. I really have to unplug my Leap. The quality of the Nokia camera is not so great. It's fine for broadcast, and there's actually a very interesting tool for broadcast. So broadcasting sport event, it's fantastic. You want to do documentary or other things, I don't know, quality is not great. Jaunt, they're starting to do VR series, and it's interesting. I still feel that bandwidth, compression, color range, to me it feels not so great yet. That's the future. Light field technology, definitely extremely interesting. As it evolves, it's going to be incredibly powerful because you can actually, there's enough parallax that's recorded that you can actually move in a pre-recorded environment. You have stereo that comes, a really great stereo that comes with it, so you can do compositing easily. You don't need green screen. You can put CG object or VFX in space because the parallax and the stereo information is so good. Except that right now using that would probably be $100 $1,000 an hour or something like that, and the amount of data is just incredible. But it will shrink, and it will eventually be accessible. What's interesting is the other end of light field technology is not just for capture, but light field technology for the screen. Being able to refocus depending on what you're looking at, and this will solve a lot of problems and issues with headache and being, you know, sickness in VR, and just increase generally the feeling of presence and immersion. So it's more or less the same technology, same concept, but used at the output and not at the input. And that's going to be very interesting. And that's coming faster than the technology to capture image. Head-mounted display, one of the reasons I put that in the presentation is that we're still, when we start a project, we still have to decide where are we going with that project. And that has a huge impact, again, on pipeline and production and project, but we are limited to picking one of those usually. You can create sometimes version for more than one, but usually you're going to be degrading your experience. So if you do something that's fully interactive, you can walk in that environment with the Oculus, then your version for the Gear VR or for Daydream won't be interactive, or you won't be able to walk around. It's going to be a different project, probably very degraded. So this is still very important. Just a word on MR. There's a lot to like about what's happening with, especially with the HoloLens, and in relation to VR right now, the technology that's in HoloLens, the inside-out tracking, which is very solid, that works really well, and track your hand properly and scan your environment in real time, is making its way in VR. So the next generation of VR headset are going to have inside-out tracking, so you don't need camera around you to track your movement, and that's going to be very, very interesting. And if you make that mobile, like the HoloLenses, then you have something, a platform that's extremely powerful. And if you can switch from one to the other, in Montreal, we have a VRVana. It's a company that created that VR headset that has 2 cameras with 120-degree field of view. They're basically mimicking your eyes, the way you see the world around you, with a little bit of an offset, which is weird because the eyes are here and you kind of feel it. But it's surprisingly seamless to go from VR to MR. So you can have augmented reality or mixed reality object that you're looking in your real world around, and suddenly you can switch to a completely closed world where, and it's really, really, really great. It's something that we've experimented a bit with, I think I have it here, with the Tango tablet. And I did that pretty early. I didn't need any more this thing, which was old Oculus DK1, so first Oculus prototype, so I just ripped the screen apart. I took this guy, the DK1 prototype, the Tango, Google Tango prototype, and I basically slip it in there. And really early, that's about, 2 years ago, we had inside-out tracking in VR, because this tablet has tracking of the environment. There's a 3D sensor and the stereoscopic camera, and it can track the environment. So really quickly, we could have mobile inside-out tracking project. The tablet is, it's an Android tablet. It was a pretty powerful one at the time, but there's limitations on the GPU and CPU, so there's some lag. But it's enough to start experimenting with it. And there's already, I think, 2 or 3 phone makers, Lenovo, LG, I think, that have Tango-based phone. So this is probably the next generation of Daydream or Samsung VR phone are going to be able to do inside-out tracking also. So this was a way for us to just start testing that really early on, just to figure out, okay, what's coming, because it's obvious that 1 year, 2 years from now, phone will be able to do that. Distribution channel, another question we ask ourselves, okay, how can we reach our audience? We're used to the same pipeline of production and distribution that we've been doing for decades. And this is changing all the time. How do we talk to people? How can we get our stuff in the hand of people? It's fantastic. There's actually a lot of options, a lot of choice. One of the limitation for me is that it's all owned usually by big corporations, Sony, Google, Facebook, and we have to go on their store. We have to sign, a distribution deal, and I really like the web VR option, and it's starting to be something that might actually work really well. So, and it's something that is very accessible. I remember 25 years ago or so playing with VRML. Back then, this is virtual reality markup language. It was like the HTML equivalent for VR, for virtual reality and 3D on the web. And it didn't work, and one of the reasons it didn't quite catch up was, well, technology wasn't there to render 3D objects on computers really fast. But the other reason was competing corporation for standards. So Microsoft, Netscape, they wanted to own that language, and it basically stopped at one point. I think WebVR is in a way better position right now because people seems to be willing to make it work and to work together and come really quickly to a standard. So that's very, very positive. And again, I was talking about hybrid. Why not make 360 video, bring it in WebVR, play with it, add controllers that are accessible, make it work on mobile. There's a lot of possibilities. But when you start a project, where you're going to distribute it is going to be very important. When we talk to producer especially, it's like, okay, well, how can I make this, available? Can we make money with it? And yeah, it's a big question. We shouldn't push away, live broadcasts of 360 or VR project in Facebook, for instance, or YouTube. Single screen 360 video. It's not because you can have interactive VR in a Vive in a closed room somewhere that these things are old and not interesting. If you have a story to tell and you want to reach people, these are still probably the most interesting thing to explore. Also, virtual cave for installations, still very immersive, very interesting, and it's a way sometimes to create a project for VR that will be shown and exported in another format that people can try. And that's it for now. There wasn't much question. Visit our site. We have an interactive section on the website where you can see some of our interactive project. Bear 71 is a VR version that is available if you have a Daydream headset. Or you can do it on a very recent version of Chrome or Firefox on a computer, but probably without the headset for now. But we are going to post all our new project there eventually, make them available. Questions? Yes.
Hi, are you aware of Chronos.org? When you mentioned about developing and you have to decide which device, and they know that's a problem, it's a consortium of hardware devices.
Yes.
To say, like, they made the announcement March 1st for OpenXR, and they're trying to alleviate the problem because it's impeding, you know, market penetration, because people are like, it's a high development cost,
Yeah.
like you said, for each individual.
Absolutely.
chain.
Well,
So
they've been
It's very encouraging to see that they're finally, you know, getting a clue.
They've been very successful with OpenGL on mobile,
Right.
so it's great that they are involved in that, and that all the corporation seems to be teaming up to make that happen. So I think that's very important, and also WebVR is maybe one of the best way to get coding artists or artists that code to be able to start making art, to make project available to all. And there's already some interesting website and experiment related to that, where you can start exploring the work of different artists that code in WebVR, and I think it's going to explode eventually.
It's interesting too, because it's right now it's still a hard sell, because A, people want to literally sell equipment, and B, and
Yeah.
that makes sense, right?
Of course.
And B, weren't you at, it was the last fall's hackathon, the VR hackathon.
Yes.
The only one that won was, there was like maybe one WebVR project in the finalists, as finalists. It's just because it's, you know, it's not quite as glossy and quite as fancy, but it will eventually get there.
Mm.
And certainly in terms of distribution, that's the
And I think for an institution like the NFB, where our mandate is to make what we create accessible, it makes sense. I think for artists that wants to control their content and make it as widely available as possible, it makes sense. There's also, you know, eventually there's going to be really, really great camera to do VR work. There will be. The light field camera will be used by majors eventually, but it's not accessible for us. So if you want to do a project and you want to make it widely available and you want something that's good quality, then having control of the distribution platform and the tools that are easy to use is extremely important. Mm. Question? Yes?
So you mentioned you created this like dome test area to do the drafts, but when you put people in there, was there any like benefit they didn't get by being alone in virtual reality?
Well, the benefit is not being alone. There's still it's interesting because when I got artists to try and to create things in Tilbrush, all of them, pretty much all of them, prefer doing it when there's no one in the room with them, and then they feel comfortable and they can explore that. So there's something great in VR about being in your closed environment and being able to create. But when you have to create a project as a team and you need to talk about it and you need to exchange and you need to see the same thing in real time at the right place, it's still very difficult right now. So the reason of that tool is specifically just for that, is to be able to be 3-4 people watching the same thing and talking about it in real time. And if you have to look at it one at a time, it's not the same thing. It's not just the same thing. There's like a spontaneity that you lose, and suddenly your meeting that could have been done in 15 minutes, 30 minutes will take 2 or 3 hours. So that's the only reason. And as a projection tool, just as an experience, it's actually pretty fun to be there, immersed in that big stereoscopic screen is actually a very cool experience too. Mm.
I know that there was our IDM hackathon kind of event where teams were building, and you brought the...
I moved the dome, yeah. Last time I do that until the NFB moved downtown. But yes, and it was a success, and it was a great way to show the project. But because of the time constraint, we didn't have the time to use the dome as a production tool that much, because the hackathon was really 3 days to create a VR project, a five team, and the projects were great, but it wasn't enough time to use a dome as a production tool. But we had 75 people looking at the project at the end, and it was a great way to show it, because it was impossible to have 75 people looking at VR project in a headset at 5 VR project. So we could show in real time what people see in the headset on the dome, so everybody can see it and talk about it.
Can you talk more about your Bear 71 and pushing it down to, it's WebVR?
It's WebVR. It would be a question. This was a project done by the Interactive Studio in Vancouver, so they know more about it. But they team with Google to take something a project that we did before. The same. It's not the same concept. Bear 71 was an interactive doc done online in using WebGL, and to bring it as a VR project. But right now you need. To be able to really experience it in VR, you need, if you want to do it on a phone, you need a Pixel phone and Daydream. That's pretty much the only, there's 2 or 3 phones available where it's going to work. Or you can do it on your computer, but it's going to be like a mouse 360 browsing experience, so it's not a full VR immersive experience.
Does it work with I guess not, it doesn't work with an iPad or something like that, it's just on one of the Google
You need yes, well, yeah, or you need a very recent browser that supports one of the recent versions of a Chromium or Firefox nightly. But that's one of the limitations of WebVR right now, actually, is being able to look at the content. But next generation phone will be able to have a decent browser and the capacity to do that. Yes?
I wonder if you could talk a little more about your interest in AR and what kinds of projects you're interested in developing,
Mm-hmm.
given some of the limitations of the technology right now.
Absolutely. First, I will make a little bit of differentiation between AR and MR. I still think there is a difference, and of course, at the beginning it started like more as a marketing speech and just a way to say that your product is different because it's doing MR. I mean, Microsoft and Magic Leap maybe we're selling that, but I think there is a difference. I see AR more as adding a layer of information in front of what you see in reality. I see it like you're driving a car of the future and you have that layer of information giving you details about your speed or what's around and information, and or you can have glasses that do that. I see MR as really mixing virtual object and virtual animation and virtual character or stories with your real world, but having an interaction with it. So that's why I see it as mixed reality, really. One of our projects, the Lonely Neuron, I think will be an interesting exploration of that, where we actually are going to use people's own environment and their real world and add layer of information and interaction, objects, things that they see in their own environment to interact with. And by doing that, understand how their own perception of their own world work. By perception, we mean how your brain process information. So how do we see things with all those specialized neurons and how we understand information? So we could use it for that. It's also, I think, HoloLens is an incredible tool. And I tried last summer the Meta 2 prototype as a wider field of view, pretty good hand tracking. I think they're really great creation tools. Because of the hand tracking, you can sculpt, you can draw in space. It's very interesting because you can share that visually, so you can be multiple people looking at the same 3D object and talking about it and modifying it in front of you. So for architect, for designer, for animators, modelers, it can be a very, very powerful creation tool. And I think there's definitely a possibility that it might, we might get rid of screen monitors if it gets really comfortable. You can have as many screens and as large as you want in your real environment. You can do that in VR too, but in your VR, again, you're closed. You can go from your room to your kitchen, where with HoloLens, you can set up a screen there in front of your bedroom and watch a video and decide to go get something in your kitchen, get a drink, come back, the screen is still there. And that's also very interesting. Except that, 40-degree field of view is, not so great. Other question?
What's the next? Because you showed us a project called Museum of
Symmetry.
Or Symmetry Museum?
Museum of Symmetry.
What's the next project that would like?
Well, that's it. The Museum of Symmetry is beginning production now. We're in the first development phase where we do a working prototype. That's the other thing that's very interesting and very new to us at the NFB is that we're used to have this very linear pipeline where we create things. If you make a documentary, you get your footage, you edit, you go and post. There's that linear, and even for animation, there's different type of animation, but the way of creating was very linear. With VR project, especially if they're based on a game engine, it's that iterative process where you have to create, like agile development for software, where you create something that works, but it's not the final project, far from it, and then you comment on it, modify it, go back to it, and this loop is something very new to us, and we're learning how to deal with that. And we also have to take artists in that way of thinking, and it's not easy for everybody to think like that. But with Museum of Symmetry, it's pretty exciting because she's a great artist. She has a very own personal style that she learned to bring in the game world because she did indie game, learning Unity by herself. And the idea of that project is to be very empowering to teenagers to learn that they can use those tools to create art, to be curious, especially girls. So we're really excited about this project.
Is it an open project where you have the artist creating?
No, it's really, but there's interactivity, and the idea of the interaction is to get the user to understand that they can be curious, that it's okay to try things. But no, it's not at that level right now. Something that other people will get involved with.
Who's the artist?
Paloma Dawkins. She did a film that you can see online. She was part of our Art House project internship. We have this internship where we have filmmakers coming to do a film, 1-minute film. It looks like very short film, but it's a 1-minute film that they do in a period of 3 months, starting from 0 to storyboard, animatic, animation, post, working with a musician, working with a sound designer, the whole process, but in 3 months. It's pretty insane. The last couple of weeks they sleep basically at the NFB and get through their project, but they come out of that and they have a pretty good idea of who they are as an artist and what they want to do, if they want to do animation still, and also of the pipeline of what it takes to do a full project. So she graduated from that from our Art House internship, and she proposed that project, and we thought it was a great idea, a great match. Other question? Yeah.
Thank you.
A pleasure.